Welcome in this video, and here we are going to start a new series known as statistics. Statistics is a vast topic in mathematics which is related to probability. So in later videos we are also going to do statistics so that in general we can talk about probability and statistics. We are going to start with statistics 1, where we are going to start with the definition of a few terms so that as we calculate later on we are going to understand more about statistics. So these are the terms we are going to interact with in our preceding videos. Now, first of all, let's know what statistics means. Well, statistics is a science. Of course, statistics is a science that deals with the use of numbers to represent facts. So we can use statistics to represent facts, and also we can describe situations. So we can describe a given situation using numbers. Now, we're also going to interact with terms like raw data. So what is raw data? Raw data can be described as unsorted or unclassified data. So this is a data that is arranged randomly. We don't have a given order. So it's just a random data that now, using the statistical skills, we are going to analyze and give feedback to a given, or using given methods that we are going to also explain in this video or in the preceding videos. Now, also, we are going to talk about things like population. So what is a population? So a population is the total number of objects in a given set of data. So if you have, say, 100, you have collected 100 items. Those 100 items are what we are going to call a population. Or sometimes you can go to a population of, say, 1,000, and you need to collect a sample data. So if you have 1,000 students, for example, that is a population, and then you pick 100 students which you want to use to analyze. The 100 students will be called the sample of the population, and therefore the population is the total number of objects or items that you want to use in a given statistics. Now let's talk about class. A class is a group of related items. So if you have a set of data, say 100 people, you cannot be able to work them out or to find the mean or the mode or the median using the 100 items. You have to classify them into groups. For example, you could be having 100 animals and you want to classify them into, say, cows, sheep, or goats. So those cows, sheep, or goats is what we call a class. For instance, if you have 100 students who have done an exam of mathematics, for example, the scores of mathematics will be out of 100 again. So you can decide to group the performance of those students as, say, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and so on. So those groups are the ones that we call classes. So for us to be able to analyze data easily, we classify them into what we call classes. Now, we can also talk about class limits. And what are class limits? These are obtained by adding or subtracting 0.5 from upper and lower boundaries. So, for us to understand better, let us consider a class here of 20 to 24. Now, that class has 20 to 24 as the upper boundary and lower boundary. So 20 is the lower boundary and 24 is the upper boundary. For us to obtain the class limit, we are going to add or subtract 0.5 from upper and lower boundaries. And therefore, when you talk about class limits, then you have to talk about upper class limits and lower class limits. For you to obtain the upper class limit, then you're going to add 0.5 in the upper boundary, and that's going to be 24 plus 0.5, that is 24.5. In the lower limit, you're going to subtract 0.5 in the lower boundary, and that is 20 minus 0.5, and that is 19.5. Well, in statistics, we also talk about class interval, or what we call class width. Depends on the book you're using. Now, this is the difference between the upper and lower boundary, or the lower limit. So if you take the difference between the upper class limit and lower class limit, that becomes the class interval, or sometimes some books represented such width or interval by I or B, depending on the book that you're going to use. Now, the class interval can be calculated as follows. So for you to calculate the class interval, then you take the upper class limit and you subtract lower class limit. That is, you subtract lower class limit from the upper class limit. So here we have the upper class limit and lower class limit. If you want to calculate the class interval, or I, then you're going to take 24.5 minus 19.5, and that becomes the class interval. So this is just a few terms that we are going to interact with in this topic of statistics, and I hope as we move along, we are going to find more terms that we can define as we move along. That's how it's done.